And so we have this tendency, I think, to point our finger at our spouse instead of looking at ourselves first, because I think looking in the mirror is difficult for us. And I think I see that a lot where couples say, yeah, I'll change if they change. So we're sitting around waiting, and if you're both doing that, well, nobody's going to change. Nothing's going to happen. And so it's so easy, I think, to point the finger at your spouse and just blame them and not look at our part of it for whatever reason. And it's just keeps us stuck.
Is blame sneaking into your marriage? Do you take responsibility for your part in your marriage, or do you just wish and wait for your spouse to change? Well, today we're uncovering some ways you might not have noticed blame in your marriage and talking about how you can break free from its damaging impact. The idea for this topic kind of snuck into one of our conversations when we realized that blame could be playing an underlying part in many marriage issues. So before we dive into this topic, I want to let you know we do have a weekly podcast email that we send, and it contains the podcast episode, podcast transcript, great quotes, all the resources we mentioned, application questions, and sometimes other things just we want to let you know about. So make sure that you're subscribed to that if you haven't already. You can find that link to subscribe in today's show notes. So, Dr. Kim, I know you see this in the counseling room. How often do you hear couples just come right out and blame each other?
Often. Probably way too often. A lot, because, if it's probably a reason a number of people come in for counseling because they can't resolve things. And so we have this tendency, I think, to point our finger at our spouse instead of looking at ourselves first, because I think looking in the mirror is difficult for us. So we'd rather, started with Adam and Eve. She gave me that apple. Well, the serpent gave it to me. It's like we've been blaming since the beginning of humankind on this planet. So people say things like, well, if he or she had not said that, I wouldn't have been mad. I wouldn't have said what I said if they didn't do that. If they would change, I would change. And I think I see that a lot where couples say, yeah, I'll change if they change. So we're sitting around waiting. And if you're both doing that, well, nobody's going to change. Nothing's going to happen. And so it's so easy, I think, to point the finger at your spouse and just blame them and not look at our part of it. For whatever reason. And it just keeps us stuck, keeps us totally stuck.
Yes. Yeah, I know. I've been there. There was literally a standstill, complete standstill if we were waiting for the other person, both of us.
Oh, yeah. When early marriage, we would, and for a few years into it, we'd do that deal. We don't talk to each other, and you just go around, you're living in the same house. You're not, it's like, I'm going to outweigh her, I'm going to outweigh him and stuff. And I think we finally figured out, okay, we need to, because a lot of times we wouldn't resolve it then. We would just kind of miss each other and get back together. And so finally we were able to say, okay, if there's a problem, we got to resolve it. So we don't waste our life just not talking to each other.
Yes. Yeah, it gets you nowhere. So, well, how do you think blame affects a marriage? What is going to happen to a marriage over the course of it with blame?
Well, I think we don't feel emotionally safe with our spouse a lot of times when that's going on. If you're being blamed for stuff, blame really it's not an act of love. I mean, you don't think about, when your definition of love, you don't put blame in there as an adjective that goes along with it. So I think we don't feel emotionally safe. It can change the trust we have each other. It can change our connection. It can change our intimacy. I mean, especially a wife, do I want to have intimacy with this person that continues to blame me all the time? I think sometimes people use it as control. And sometimes I think even hide behind our own insecurities of it. It's just not taking responsibility for our own actions and words. And so when we don't do that, all those negative things I just talked about can happen. And so what you've got there is your relationship, your marriage gets more and more chipped away at it. And it may not be a big chunk, but it may be the little chunks that continue. And, well, why don't you trust me? Well, why aren't we intimate? Or why aren't we connected? Well, it's because you're blaming me for everything. You don't take responsibility for anything. That doesn't work.
No, certainly not. So, I mean, that's a pretty bleak picture because it just sounds really, really tense, disconnected.
And I think we all can get there for a minute, sure. We think, and then I think what we have to realize is that when something happens, it's so important to look at yourself too. Okay, what is my part in this? And ask God to show you what your part is in that, because you probably played a part, maybe 5%, but most likely you played a part by the time it gets to that argument. And so, own your own part in it, whatever that is.
Yeah. Yeah, that's huge. I mean, I love when you interviewed Tony Newhoff about that, and she wrote a whole book about, just for if couples are on the brink of divorce, called Before You Split. And she said one of the most important things you have to do is you have to say, what was my part? Because both spouses have a part, even if it's 90-10.
Right.
You've got some part there that you can own. And once you own it, that changes things.
Absolutely. And then you're in it with your spouse.
Yeah. Yeah, so I have a feeling we'll be getting more into that part of it as we go on in this episode. But what are some sneaky ways blame might be showing up in a marriage other than just outright?
Yeah, I think that passive aggressive behavior is always a good one. We're not really addressing the issues, but where anger comes out in other ways. So, and Nancy made a great example yesterday when we were videoing, and she said, in early marriage, when I wanted alone me time, I didn't know how to ask you for that. So I would do something to irritate you or upset you so you would stay away from me when we had that. And I had to learn to tell you, hey, I need some me time, which was great with me. But again, I think so it does sometimes come out passive aggressive. I didn't know why she was being up that way. But I left her alone. So that's the thing. Some of these work, and that's bad.
Right.
Sarcasm. I think we can use that. It kind of disguises the blame. Being the victim. If you get in that victim mentality, you're going to blame your spouse for your feelings or what's your situation. You're going to bring up the past, which has, when it's not even relevant to the situation you're in, but it just, we've all got, if you're married long enough, you have this arsenal of things that you know about your spouse and things that happen in your relationship. And you've got to choose when you're arguing not to bring all those out, because then it's just not fighting fair. And then we talked about this a little bit, the silent treatment, trying to make your spouse feel guilty or something like that. So, yeah, I think it can show up in a lot of different ways in a marriage, and the things we're talking about are not the healthy ways to do it. And so those behaviors, although we may think they're working short-term, long-term, they're not going to work at all.
Yeah, no. Yeah, it's going to be a really destructive pattern because you're never actually dealing with the issue. You're just kind of band-aiding the moment.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So have you ever dealt with this in your marriage? You shared a couple from early marriage, but how has this played out?
I think bringing up the past was certainly something that we could do, with each other. Well, this is the 15th time you've done this. And I think once we do that, then it's like, I can't, like say if I bring up this 15th time you've done this to Nancy, well, she can't deal with all 15 times there. I've just kind of put the blame on her and not given her a way to even deal with it. And so we've got to, we had to learn that we got to deal with what's in front of us then, and we can't put the past in it or other things in there. We got to deal with the one issue at a time. I think that was the thing that we do a lot. The silent treatment, I said that we did, just trying to, make this person feel bad enough so they're going to say that they're sorry or whatever that way. We probably did some passive aggressive other than what Nancy was talking about with her. I'm sure I did too. Probably mine would be maybe ignoring her at times because I just didn't like the behavior instead of finding out what's going on, those kind of things. So I just do that. So I think definitely we can do those things. What about you and Brian? Anything?
No, we've never.
You're perfect, right? Well, you haven't had your first fight yet, isn't that right?
20 years in, man.
Yeah.
No, 20 years, and it's a miracle because we got such a rough start. We had just a terrible beginning to our marriage. And I think I mean, we made it through, praise the Lord, because we were just so stubborn and we're committed to Jesus. So we knew we had that in common.
Yes.
But I think that this was really probably the core issue that we dealt with for a long time was just not wanting to take personal responsibility. And one way that I would do that was by essentially expecting him to read my mind. So I wouldn't take ownership of saying things I needed to say to him, because kind of what you were saying about Nancy, I didn't know how to ask for things or how to verbalize them. Just coming from our very different personalities, he could just say, oh, I want to do this or I want to do that. And I wouldn't think to do the same. I wouldn't think to say, I really need some alone time. I'm going to, go take a walk. What do you think? Is that fine with you? Or whatever I would say. I would just think he should understand these things without me communicating them, which is not taking responsibility for my part of things. And so I would get really frustrated, even in a fight, because we have such different conflict styles. He wants to tackle things right head on, and I need some time to process. It takes me a while. But we didn't have words to articulate that difference. So in arguments, it would be so heated because I would be trying to get some space to process, but I wouldn't ask for it because I didn't know how to yet.
Yeah.
And so blame would just keep coming up over and over. And if he would just know, if he would only understand me, and isn't he supposed to do that? He's my husband. He's supposed to love me like Christ loved the church, for goodness sake, just
what is wrong with this guy?
Right. And just piling all this stuff on him that he had no idea was going on because I wouldn't communicate it to him. So that was huge for us.
I don't know where that came from, but I've seen that a lot, and I see it a lot more in wives than I do husbands, of thinking that your spouse can read your mind.
It's terrible.
And there's just no way. Just the male-female differences alone and how we process and stuff. But I think a lot of wives get into that, and then they're upset their husband, and he doesn't know, like with Brian, what's she upset about?
Idea. I will say 2 big sources where I got that idea from pop culture, from watching movies. And then sorry, Dad, but he's really a great dad to 3 girls. And then my mom, in his marriage, he was surrounded by girls who were very similar. He kind of could read our minds. And so that was the only male I'd ever lived with. And so it really, I didn't know I thought that's just how men were.
All men would be, sure.
Right. Nope.
Your dad's your model. Oh my gosh, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, that was Nancy's dad. Three daughters, a wife, 2 female dogs. When I came in as the first son-in-law, it was like they didn't know what to do with me.
Absolutely not. No. It's very strange.
Right. Yeah.
We're like, does Dad know how to talk to a male? Like,
yeah, exactly.
He's so good with us. Yeah. So that was it was tough to navigate that because it really is hard to become conscious of that.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah. So I guess I just set us up well for the next question because I want to talk about personal responsibility. And I was such a great example of what not to do. So how can we make sure that we take appropriate responsibility, and why do we need to?
I think, I think we need to, because it does build trust in the relationship. If you're both taking responsibility and willing to say, yeah, that's my part for sure. Or maybe, oh, I didn't see that. Yeah, it is my part too. Whatever it is. I think it helps develop healthy communication because you're not playing games with the communication, which we can do. If we're blaming, we can say all kinds of things. They're kind of game playing just to try to get them to admit that they're wrong, I think it shows emotional maturity because I think that helps us face the challenges that we have in marriage. And I think it also shows a commitment to the marriage and to our individually growing. I couldn't stay the way I was at 20 years old for a whole marriage. I've got to grow too. So I think taking responsibility, being really genuine in your apology is important. And I think that involves really repentance. Like not just that I'm sorry that I yelled, and so then I yelled the next day and I'm sorry I yelled. And no, it's got to be like, I'm working on that. I think I'm going to go see a counselor because that anger, I get there too quickly. And that's when I figure out that that's when I yell and I want to stop that. Or, I won't do that anymore. I'm praying about that. I'm asking God to help me with that. And I believe that he will because I'm sincere in this. And I think that's what God wants for me and for a marriage. So I think those really help. I think really listening to your spouse is so important in taking responsibility. What are they really saying to me instead of thinking about what I'm going to say back or how I'm going to win this battle? You get into that, your marriage loses. Anytime you get in a situation where there's a win-lose, the marriage loses. Avoid getting defensive, I think, is really important. That's something that I've had to work with a lot, like when we're talking about in a podcast where Nancy would do something because she wanted the me time. And so she would do something to irritate me, go back. Well, what I would do then, I would get defensive and say something back. Well, then she did get her mean time, but then we had an issue we had to deal with because I had reacted in a wrong time. And so getting defensive, really clear about the expectations you have for each other and being able to verbalize that. When you're talking about reading your mind, I think we do that a lot with expectations. That it's like, I have this expectation of Nancy and, well, I never told her about it, but I'm mad at her because she didn't do it. That you've got to be clear with them, make sure they're reasonable, make sure you both buy into that. And then, and of course, always knowing, if you're stuck, go to counseling. Find good Christian counselors. It's amazing. I see some people, I've only seen them maybe 2 or 3 times because they just need someone to help them get on the right track and they just add a third person perspective into it that they couldn't get there on their own because they're so busy defending themselves or trying to prove they're right or something like that. And so that's one of the values. And then, of course, if there's some deeper issues, you can do counseling longer. But sometimes just getting somebody that can listen and can give you some ideas, you're not going to be in counseling the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Maybe 1 or 2 sessions does it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so important because I know when we started going to counseling, the first couple sessions were us just blaming ourselves in front of a counselor, blaming each other with while we paid a counselor to watch us do it.
Yes, yeah,
and it's like that was a nightmare. But really, when you do drop that defensiveness and instead have humility, right? So that goes back to owning your part. Then either one spouse doing that can shift the course of things, but then both spouses doing that's really going to help. But I think this is so interesting because when we talk about just like reframing and changing our mindset, all of this stuff is if we put it between us and God instead of waiting for the spouse, but we say, okay, my part, I'm going to own the fact that I have decided I want to follow Jesus and I want to have a godly marriage. Well, that means he's going to change me because I am a sinner. And so instead of expecting that, oh, I'm right about this, and you should think and see things the way I see them. Instead, having that humility to go, oh, actually, no, I'm a sinner, and Jesus is changing me and transforming me slowly, little by little. And so then these situations with the spouse are beautiful opportunities where, ouch, yeah, you got me on that one. I was off base, I was out of line, and I'm sorry. And that's between me and the Lord, like you said, the repentance piece of, I don't need to defend that action. I can instead just say, oh, you're right. That was wrong. And I'm working on that. And so it's shifting from that, like you said, the win-lose to instead, it's like the growth mindset of, okay, yeah, God has some work to do on me. And I'll go along with that instead of trying to stiff arm him and my spouse at the same time.
Yeah, that's so good because we do. We just can do that so easily.
So easily.
Yeah.
Yes. So let's talk about some another way that blame might come out. There's a cultural idea of sort of like 50-50 marriage. Each person does their 50% and you get 100%. But I think that too has overtones of blame or some of the cultural ideas we have about spouses completing each other, filling each other up, So why don't those kind of approaches like the 50-50, why doesn't that work?
Well, almost like it becomes a transaction between a husband and wife. And that's not healthy. It's like because conditional commitment. You do your 50 and I'll do my 50. If you do 49, I'm not doing 51.
Yeah.
Things like that.
Yeah.
So how do you even judge what 50-50 is? I mean, what I think is 50%, Nancy may see as 70%. And so you get your own definition of that that can be very different. And I think it becomes scorekeeping, and that's so dangerous well, yeah, I was 70% yesterday and you were 30. So you got a lot to make up for today, and so I think what it breeds is it doesn't breed oneness that we talk about a lot in a marriage relationship. So I don't think it works. I think it just sets up, it's just really unhealthy to me in the whole part of it. Marriage is both of you doing probably 100% and God doing right in the middle of it, It's everybody doing what God asks you to do in the marriage. And there's times in our marriage that I need to do more than 50%. And there's times that Nancy needs to do more than 50%. And we do it without even thinking about it. But if we were writing down every day what our score was, that's just a mess. It's like, okay, I've been given 70% for 2.5 weeks. So I'm giving 30 for the next 2.5 weeks. So you can catch up. No, that didn't work. No, that didn't work.
I've never seen scorekeeping go well. I mean, I've never seen a couple who tried to make things fair actually succeed in like, hey, you got an hour off. Now I get an hour off. You did this chore. I'll do that chore. It's never going to feel completely fair, is it?
No, absolutely not. Because it's how you define that in your mind. Instead of working together as a team on it and making those decisions. So it's a win-win thing. That's what you really want.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. And, we talked in the last episode about reframing your spouse. And so if you're stuck on that, like you've got to do this bar, you're not really looking at yourself and what you could do to be the best spouse you can be.
Absolutely. When you get up to 50%, I'll do my part.
Yeah.
But really, when you think of 50%, that's half of 100%.
Yeah.
So I'm not even doing that much.
Yeah.
I mean, let's get my 100 up there. And then,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think at this point, I would point us to in the book of Romans, I think it's 12:9, where it says to outdo one another in showing honor. And that's it. The way it was taught to me was that's the only competitive verse in the Bible. And so if you're a competitive person, there you go. That's your challenge. Outdo one another each other in showing honor.
I've had couples that really got that and really almost every day, and that had work to get there, really tried to outdo each other. How can I love him more than he loves me today? And how can I love her more than she loves me? And man, when you get into that, then that's really fun. It's just like, I'm doing everything I can and she's doing everything she can. And wow, this is really fun.
That's so cool. And you know what? It kind of makes me think of something funny. And I just realized this is blame also, but I know when we tried first to like express the love languages, to learn the love languages and express those, and Brian's is words of affirmation. And I'm not a words of affirmation person. And so when I would try to communicate like affirmations, they weren't going across. Like he wasn't receiving them in the way, like I felt it was a big deal. Like I am saying an affirmation, and it wasn't a huge deal to him. And I wanted to blame him and be like, oh, I did my part. I tried it. But, and instead I realized I had to say, wait, why didn't that connect? What was it about that? What would make it so that you felt that and heard that and received it? And so I had to take that responsibility to go, okay, I tried. It didn't work, but that doesn't mean I give up and say, well, you're broken. It just meant I had to try a different way and learn something there. And so I did learn it. Okay, maybe it's timing. Maybe it's tone of voice. Maybe it's, hey, I'm going to say something to you right now. Listen, making sure it was the moment.
Yeah. That reminds me of the story of the little girl that was talking to her dad sitting on his lap and he was doing something else on his phone or something. She grabbed his face and said, what'd she say? Listen with your face when I'm talking to you, Daddy.
Yes, like, yeah. Pay attention.
But I think that makes sense because because how you, especially since that wasn't your love language, you're just kind of, Googling things. What can I do to show what are some words of affirmation? And so taking the time to identify with that, and
Mm-hmm.
plus it makes it a lot easier for you then.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And you know what you're doing is hitting the target instead of just missing it
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and maybe every once in a while hitting it.
Yeah. And then, what's funny? It's like it was like a cheat code we discovered too. Because one of the things in this current season of life is I like gifts as one of my love languages. And so I just started a notes list on my phone. And I was like, this feels weird. But Brian, shared it with Brian. He's like, oh my gosh, that was the best thing ever. That helped me so much.
Oh, yeah.
And so looking for ways to like, how can we communicate better about this instead of saying, sorry, I tried, it's on you now, it's your fault. But instead to communicate better and more about this is how things can work better for us together.
Absolutely. And I think it's, going back to reading the mind and stuff like that, or even if it's a love language thing, if you give that list in there and Brian says, oh, that's great, but he didn't ever use it, well, then you might get upset. But you've
Right.
given him a tool that he wanted and
Yeah.
to show love and make sure it hit the mark. And so that's really good. I think we, sometimes people say, well, he should have known that, she should have known that. And I said, well, tell them. And then if they don't do it, then we can talk about why they didn't do it, but give them a chance first.
Yeah. Yeah, he asked for that. So I was like, oh, great. Okay, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
So you're piling up the gifts.
Well, it's like, that at certain occasions.
Yeah. Well, I think too, I've sung to a couple the other day and hers was gifts. And, she said, I didn't want him to think when she found out that, I expected something diamonds or this or that all the time. And she said, God, the week that I was having a hard week and he brought me home my favorite candy bar.
Yeah.
I love that. That gift really, that meant a lot to me that week. So
yeah, big time. It's the little things.
It is.
Yeah.
You can still buy the diamonds.
The what?
You can still buy the diamonds though. If you want to, right?
Yeah, that's fine too. Yes. That's fine too.
That's not off limits.
No.
All right.
Oh, so one thing we have to discuss about blame is if you do commit to stop blaming your spouse, does that give them a free pass to mess up or to hurt you?
No, I don't think so. I think choosing not to blame doesn't mean that you're not going to hold each other accountable for things that go on. It's important to address those issues, but not resort to blame, because accountability is about recognizing and owning your actions, the consequences they cause, all those kind of things. And blame is more about pointing the finger and not taking responsibility. So it's addressing those things in a healthy way, owning the actions, talking about the consequences. For blaming, you're pointing the fingers like we've talked about, and you're not taking responsibility. So yes, you do want to continue to deal with the things that come up because you want to resolve those and work through them so your marriage is better and healthier. And if you ignore them, it's not like you're placing blame, but you're not really dealing with an issue, and it's going to keep coming up and causing issues in your marriage.
Yeah. Yes. One thing that makes me think of is just how we just come back to communication over and over. And so I think the fact that we have to be willing to talk about these things, like if you were hurt, then it's going to be a lot more helpful to say, I was hurt than to say, you hurt me or you made me mad. It can't be you made me because I had the choice of how I responded, So I think even in things like that, we have to say, I was mad, and own that instead of just you. And so we have to communicate about those things in helpful ways, but you can still talk about it.
No, I think it's really good. And I think we can all fall into that trap if you made me do that. And your point of that we can't make someone else do something. And that we just, we've got to take responsibility there. And that's hard sometimes. Especially if your spouse did something that really hurt you or something like that.
Yes.
But you still have the choice how you handle that and how you deal with it.
Yeah. Yes. And I think there's like definitely some really tough situations with that, with really hurtful things happening. But I think it's also just in the more daily parts of marriage, it's very freeing to know that we do have the choice and we do have the agency over our responses. And so somebody else doesn't get to pick for me if I'm going to be angry and stewing over this and mulling over it and getting bitter. They don't get to pick that. I get to pick that response. And so that's actually, I think, in marriage, very empowering for both spouses to realize, no, I don't have to wait for you to do 50%. I have the choice to be the best spouse I can be. I don't have to wait for you to stop making me mad. I have the choice. I can learn to handle anger in a healthier way. So in all those things, we have the opportunity to follow God and follow his ways, regardless of how the other person acts toward us.
Oh, that's so good. That's so well said. Absolutely.
So if a listener is listening today, recognizing any of these signs, what's their next step to breaking free?
You got to admit you have a problem. Going back to that, it's always the first step in anything I think about change. Then asking your spouse for forgiveness, I think, is important. I think that step, and then getting the help, whatever help you need. It may be an accountability partner, maybe counseling, maybe be an online course, whatever it is to help you recognize those and break free. But I think once you involve God in it, praying, admitting you have a problem, asking God to help you, ask your spouse for forgiveness, tell them you're working on it, and then follow through with getting the help you need, then you can break free.
Mm-hmm.
It's and it's, when I see people do that, or when I've done that in my own life, there's just a joy that comes with that. When you get out from under that, and sometimes you don't even realize how heavy it is because you've been in that pattern and it's kind of become your normal until you get out from under it and you realize, wow, I don't have to blame. That wasn't good for me or for her. And now I don't have the need to do, because I've dealt with it. I don't need to do that anymore. And there's a real freedom there. It's hard that all these negative things we talk about are hard, and they take a lot of energy, and they take a lot of time, and they wear on our bodies and our minds and stress and all those kind of things that aren't good for us. So, getting mad and blaming your spouse is going to affect you in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
And we were talking yesterday about, a report that came out. I need to find that inside it. But basically, one of the things they said, they were showing the benefits of a healthy marriage, and they were all medical things about that you live longer, that you fight cancer better, that you heal quicker through injuries or illnesses, all these kind of things. And just that God had a plan for marriage. And it wasn't just to procreate and they have a bunch of people running around. It was a relationship on a really deep level. And when you have that, life should make a difference. And when you work on that, it does make a difference.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. I love that too with this topic of like our mindset and our marriage, because it's all this like scientific stuff that they'll come out with this brand new research, and it's all stuff that God's already put it out there in the Bible, like it's there. Yes. It's not new.
No, and it's cool that somebody, sometimes some people come in and tell me something, like that, say it's something like that and everything. And I say, yeah, it's so cool how Paul said this.
Yeah.
And I go, Paul wrote that? I go, yeah, isn't that cool that God did that? And I'm glad they're coming out with it now, because new people are going to hear it that hadn't heard it before or hadn't read Paul, or hadn't read Romans, so yeah, it's really cool.
That is really cool. It's so encouraging. And so, and I love too, where you often tell us that, God won't lead you to do anything that's bad for you or bad for your marriage.
Absolutely. And there's just a lot of security for me that comes in that. If that's from God, okay, I'm doing it. I don't want to do it. It sounds hard. I'm not sure how she'll react, but I'm going to do it. And then you think, okay, God, you really do know what's best. Yeah. You really do know her better than I do, And so it's just involving him and trusting him. And it's pretty fun that you really realize, of all the people that are living, have ever lived, that he cares about you and your marriage. And he's right there for you, just like you're the only couple on earth, which is really, really, really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. He's got your back.
Yeah.
So good.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been such a great topic of breaking free from blame in our marriage. And next week, we'll continue our Mind Your Marriage series talking about the power of gratitude. And I'm so excited about that topic. Thanks so much for joining us today on the Awesome Marriage Podcast. Have a great day and do something awesome for your marriage today.